What I'm about to tell you will shake everything you believe about success. I stood there in my corner office on the 47th floor, looking out at the city skyline that I'd conquered over the past decade. My name was on the building directory downstairs. My face had been on the cover of Forbes, Entrepreneur magazine, and Inc. 3 times. I was the guy everyone wanted to be, the success story, the self-made millionaire who built a tech empire from nothing. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now before this story continues. You need to hear what happens when one split-second decision destroys everything. 10 years. That's how long it took me to build Martinez Technologies from a one-room apartment startup to a company valued at $340 million. 10 years of 16-hour days, of sacrificing relationships, of missing birthdays and anniversaries, of eating cold pizza at 3 a.m. while debugging code that nobody else could figure out. 10 years of saying no to vacations, to parties, to life itself, because I was building something bigger than me. Something that would last, something that would matter. I remember the early days so vividly. 2015. I was 28 years old, broke, living in a studio apartment in Brooklyn that was so small I could literally touch all 4 walls from the center of the room. I had $847 in my bank account and an idea that everyone told me was stupid. Cloud-based AI solutions for small businesses? Nobody wants that. It's too complicated, too expensive, too ahead of its time. That's what they all said. My parents, my friends, the 12 investors who rejected me in the first 3 months. But I saw something they didn't. I saw the future. I saw small businesses drowning in data they couldn't analyze, making decisions based on gut feelings instead of insights, losing money because they didn't have access to the tools that big corporations used. And I knew that I could change that. So I maxed out 3 credit cards, took out a personal loan I probably shouldn't have qualified for, and hired the first developer who believed in my vision. Carlos. He worked for Equity and Ramen Noodles for the first 8 months. The first year was brutal. We launched our beta product to 17 clients. 11 of them cancelled within 2 months, but 6 stayed. 6 businesses that saw what we were trying to do and believed in us enough to stick around while we figured it out. I personally called each of them every single day. Every single day. What's working? What's not? What do you need? I became obsessed with making them successful because I knew that if I could make them successful, word would spread. And it did. By year 2, we had 89 clients. By year 3, 340. By year 4, we'd raised our Series A, $8.5 million from a venture capital firm that had rejected me twice before. I'll never forget the look on that partner's face when I walked into their office for the 3rd pitch. He didn't think I'd come back. He didn't think I'd survive. But there I was, with numbers that spoke louder than any pitch deck ever could. But what nobody knew, what I hid from everyone, including myself, was that I was building my success on a foundation that was slowly cracking. Year 5 was when we really exploded. We hit 2,000 clients. We expanded to 3 offices, New York, San Francisco, Austin. I hired 127 employees. We were mentioned in TechCrunch, Wired, The Wall Street Journal. I was invited to speak at conferences, to sit on panels, to share my secrets to success with rooms full of hungry entrepreneurs who looked at me like I was some kind of god, and I loved it. I absolutely loved every second of it. The recognition, the validation, the proof that I wasn't crazy, that my vision was right, that all those people who doubted me were wrong. I bought the penthouse apartment I'd always dreamed of. I traded my beat-up Honda for a Tesla. I started dating a model I met at a tech industry party. On paper, on Instagram, in the eyes of everyone watching, I was living the dream. But inside I was exhausted, burned out in ways I didn't even recognize yet. I'd stopped sleeping more than 4 hours a night. I'd developed this twitch in my left eye that wouldn't go away. I'd forgotten what it felt like to laugh, really laugh, at something genuinely funny. But I couldn't stop. Stopping meant losing momentum. Stopping meant giving competitors a chance to catch up. Stopping meant showing weakness, so I pushed harder. Year 6, Year 7, Year 8. Each one bigger than the last. More clients, more revenue, more employees, more offices, more everything. We crossed 100 million in annual revenue. In Year 8, I was 36 years old and on top of the world, and that's exactly when I made the mistake that would cost me everything. It was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were my executive team meetings. We were discussing our expansion into the European market, big opportunity, massive potential, but it required a significant investment, restructuring our entire data infrastructure to comply with GDPR regulations, hiring local teams, building new partnerships. We're talking about a $45 million initiative that would take 18 months to implement properly. But I didn't want to wait 18 months. 18 months felt like forever. Our competitors were already making moves in Europe. I could see the market opportunity slipping away while we did everything by the book. So when my CTO, Jennifer, brilliant woman who'd been with me since Year 2, when she raised concerns about rushing the timeline, about the security protocols that needed to be in place, about the compliance issues that required careful attention, I did something I'd never done before. I overruled her. Not just overruled her, I dismissed her concerns in front of the entire executive team. I said, and I quote, "We didn't build this company by being careful. We built it by moving fast and taking risks. Let's cut the timeline in half and launch in 9 months." The room went quiet. Jennifer looked at me like she didn't recognize me, but nobody challenged me. I was the founder, the visionary, the guy who'd been right about everything for 10 years. What I didn't know, what I couldn't see because I was too blinded by ambition and ego, was that this one decision, this one moment of impatience, would trigger a chain reaction that would destroy everything I'd built. The next 6 months were a blur of aggressive execution and ignored warning signs. I pushed my team harder than I'd ever pushed them before. We were going to conquer Europe, and we were going to do it in record time. Jennifer tried to talk to me privately 3 different times. 3 times I was too busy to have that conversation. I told myself she was being overly cautious, that she'd lost her edge, that maybe she wasn't the right person to lead us into this next phase. The same person who'd helped me build our entire technical infrastructure from scratch. The same person who'd worked 80-hour weeks without complaint for years. Suddenly, in my mind, she was the problem. We cut corners I swore I'd never cut. We rushed security audits. We skipped redundancy testing. We pushed code to production that hadn't been properly vetted. But we were moving fast, and fast was what mattered. Every week I'd look at our progress charts and feel this rush of adrenaline. We were ahead of schedule, way ahead. We were going to launch in Europe 2 months earlier than even my aggressive timeline. I was going to prove everyone wrong again. Month 7, we started onboarding our first European clients. Mid-sized companies in Germany, France, and the UK. They were excited. We were excited. The press was writing stories about our lightning-fast international expansion. I did interviews where I talked about moving at the speed of innovation and not letting bureaucracy slow down progress. I sounded like every other arrogant tech founder who thought the rules didn't apply to them. But I couldn't see it. I was too high on my own success. And then came March 15th, the day that changed everything. I was in a meeting with potential investors. We were considering a Series D round that would have valued the company at over $500 million. My phone started buzzing, then buzzing again and again. I ignored it the first few times, but then my assistant actually walked into the meeting, something she'd never done before. Her face was white. "You need to come now," she said. "It's an emergency." I excused myself and walked into my office to find Jennifer, my head of security, and our legal counsel, all standing there with expressions I'd never seen before. "We've been breached," Jennifer said. and her voice was completely flat. No emotion, just fact. Our European servers. Someone got in through the authentication system. They have access to everything. My stomach dropped. How bad? I asked, even though I already knew the answer was going to destroy me. 452 companies, all their data, customer information, financial records, proprietary algorithms, trade secrets, everything, it's all compromised. I sat down. Actually, I didn't sit down. My legs just gave out, and it fell into my chair. This couldn't be happening. This wasn't possible. We had security measures. We had protocols. And then I remembered. We had rushed them. We had cut corners. We had skipped the redundancy testing because it would have added 2 weeks to the timeline. We had ignored Jennifer's warnings about the authentication vulnerabilities because fixing them properly would have delayed our launch. How did they get in? I asked, though part of me already knew. Jennifer pulled up her laptop and showed me. It was exactly the vulnerability she'd warned us about, the one I'd dismissed, the one I'd said we'd address after launch. A simple authentication bypass that a halfway competent hacker could exploit. And someone had. Someone very competent had found it, exploited it, and waltzed right into our systems like we'd left the front door wide open. But the worst part? The absolute worst part? This was entirely preventable. If I'd listened to Jennifer. If I'd taken the time to do things right. If I'd waited the extra 9 months to ensure our security infrastructure was solid, if I'd been the careful, methodical builder I used to be, instead of the reckless, ego-driven founder I'd become, none of this would have happened. Not one single bit of it. The next 48 hours were a nightmare I still can't fully process. We had to notify every single affected client, 452 conversations, where I had to tell successful business owners that I'd lost their data, that their customers' private information was potentially in the hands of criminals, that their trade secrets might be sold to their competitors. I personally made every single call. It was the least I could do, though it felt like nothing. The lawsuits started within a week, first a dozen, then 50, then over 100. Class action lawsuits, individual lawsuits, regulatory investigations from 3 different countries. The EU hit us with a GDPR violation fine that made my head spin. 67 million euros. Our insurance covered some of it, but nowhere near all of it. Our valuation, which had been climbing toward 500 million, plummeted overnight. Investors pulled out, clients cancelled contracts, employees started leaving, and I had no one to blame but myself. Month 1 after the breach, we lost 78% of our European clients and 34% of our US clients. The press that had celebrated our rise now gleefully documented our fall. Tech Wunderkind's empire crumbles. After massive security breach, how arrogance led to the downfall of Martinez Technologies. They weren't wrong. That was the most painful part. Every article that called me reckless, every analysis that said I'd prioritized growth over security, every interview with former employees who said I'd stopped listening to advice, it was all true. Month 2, we had to lay off 60% of our workforce. I had to look people in the eyes. People who'd believed in me, who'd sacrificed for the company, who'd turned down other opportunities to be part of what we were building, and tell them we couldn't afford to keep them anymore. Some of them cried. Some of them were angry. Some just looked at me with this profound disappointment that hurt worse than any anger could have. Jennifer resigned. She didn't make a scene. Didn't say, "I told you so," even though she had every right to. She just put her resignation letter on my desk with a single sentence. "I hope you figure out what really matters." And then she was gone. The person who'd been there from almost the beginning. The person who'd tried to save me from myself. Gone. Month 3, the board of directors, the same board that had rubber-stamped every decision I'd made for years, held a vote of no confidence. They removed me as CEO of my own company. The company I'd built from nothing. They offered me a consulting role, a token position with no real power, just to save face. I turned it down. What was the point? I'd already lost everything that mattered. I watched from the outside as they brought in a new CEO to try to salvage what was left. He made all the right moves, strengthened security, rebuilt trust, settled lawsuits. But it was too little, too late. 6 months after the breach, Martinez Technologies was sold for parts. $340 million in value, reduced to a $23 million acquisition by a larger firm who only wanted our client list and our brand name. The name I'd built, the legacy I'd created, sold off like used furniture, and just like that, a decade of work vanished because of one rookie mistake, thinking I was too successful to fail. The months after losing my company were the darkest of my entire life. I went from being the guy everyone wanted to talk to being the cautionary tale everyone whispered about. Former colleagues crossed the street when they saw me coming. Conference organizers who'd begged me to speak suddenly had full schedules. Investors who'd practically thrown money at me wouldn't return my calls. I'd become toxic overnight. The failure, the has-been, the guy who had it all and threw it away. I spent the first month after the acquisition just sitting in my penthouse apartment, staring at the walls. The same apartment I'd bought as a trophy, as proof that I'd made it. Now it just felt empty, massive and hollow and suffocating all at once. I'd wake up at 3 a.m., the same time I used to be working, grinding, building, and I'd have nothing to do, no emails to answer, no problems to solve, no empire to run. Just silence and the crushing weight of my own failure. My girlfriend left. Not that I could blame her. She'd signed up to date a successful CEO, not a cautionary tale. She tried to be nice about it, said something about needing to focus on herself, and this isn't working anymore. But I could see it in her eyes. The embarrassment, the disappointment, the relief that she could escape before my failure rubbed off on her. I didn't even argue. What was there to say? The money situation became real very quickly. People think that when you build a company worth hundreds of millions, you personally have hundreds of millions. That's not how it works. Most of my wealth was tied up in company stock that became virtually worthless after the breach. I had some savings, sure. But between legal fees, settlements I was personally liable for, and the lifestyle I'd been living, it evaporated faster than I could have imagined. The penthouse had to go. I couldn't afford the mortgage anymore, and honestly, I couldn't stand being there. Every corner reminded me of the person I'd become, the arrogant, reckless version of myself who thought he was invincible. I moved to a one-bedroom apartment in Queens. Nothing like the studio I'd started in. This one was actually nice, but the symbolism wasn't lost on me. I'd come full circle, except this time I was 15 years older and infinitely more broken. I tried to start over. Of course I tried. That's what you're supposed to do, right? Fall down 7 times, get up 8. All those motivational quotes I used to post on social media about resilience and persistence. But here's what those quotes don't tell you. Sometimes when you fall, you break something essential inside yourself. Something that doesn't heal just because you decide to get back up. I had ideas for new companies. Good ideas, actually. Better ideas than the one that had made me successful the first time, because now I understood what really mattered. But nobody wanted to invest in me. Nobody wanted to take a chance on the guy who'd spectacularly destroyed $340 million in value. I pitched to 47 different investors over 6 months. 47 rejections. Some were polite about it. Others were brutally honest. You had your shot, and you blew it. The isolation was the worst part. I'd spent 10 years building a network, cultivating relationships, creating this persona of the successful entrepreneur. But I'd never built real friendships. I'd built connections based on what I could do for people, what they could do for me, how we could help each other climb higher. When I had nothing left to offer, when I wasn't useful anymore, those connections evaporated like morning fog. I'd scroll through my phone, 2,847 contacts and realize I didn't have a single person I could call just to talk. Not one. My parents tried to help. God, they really tried. My mum would call every week, asking if I was eating okay, if I needed anything, suggesting I come visit for the weekend. My dad, who'd never really understood the tech world, who'd thought my success was partially luck, offered to help me find a normal job. They meant well, but I couldn't face them. I couldn't sit across from my father and admit that he'd been right, that maybe I had gotten lucky, that maybe I wasn't the genius I'd thought I was. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Richardson. She was good, patient. She didn't judge me when I showed up to our first session and just cried for 45 minutes straight. She asked me questions I didn't want to answer. When did you stop enjoying the work? What were you running from? What were you trying to prove, and to whom? I didn't have good answers, or maybe I did, but I wasn't ready to face them. The depression hit hard around month 8. I'd heard about it, read about it, even had employees deal with it. But experiencing it yourself is completely different. It wasn't sadness. Sadness I could have handled. It was this profound emptiness, this sense that nothing mattered, that nothing would ever matter again. I'd wake up and have to convince myself to get out of bed. Not because I had things to do, I didn't, but because Dr. Richardson said I needed to maintain routines. I gained 40 pounds, stopped shaving regularly, stopped caring about how I looked because who was I trying to impress? I'd catch my reflection in store windows sometimes and not recognize myself. Is that really me? That guy with the dead eyes and the wrinkled shirt and the general air of defeat? That can't be me. I'm supposed to be successful. I'm supposed to be someone who matters. One particularly bad night, I found myself going through old news articles about my company, reading the early profiles when we were hot and growing, looking at pictures of myself from those days, confident, energetic, ready to conquer the world. I barely recognized that person, and the comments on the later articles, the ones about the breach and the collapse, brutal. Arrogant idiot got what he deserved. Another tech bro who thought he was smarter than everyone else. Good riddance to another overvalued startup. The thing is, they weren't wrong. I had been arrogant. I had thought I was smarter than everyone else. I had stopped listening to the people who actually knew what they were talking about. I had prioritized growth over everything else, over security, over sustainability, over the well-being of my employees, over basic common sense. I had become exactly the kind of founder I used to criticize when I was starting out. But here's what I learned in those dark months. You don't really know yourself until you've lost everything. When you're successful, when everything's going right, it's easy to think you know who you are. You build this identity around your achievements, your company, your status. But that's not who you are. That's just a costume you're wearing. The real you, the actual core of who you are as a human being. You only discover that when the costume gets ripped away, when you're sitting alone in a small apartment with no company, no status, no achievements, and you have to figure out if there's anything worthwhile underneath all that performance. And for a long time, I thought the answer was no. I thought I was just the sum of my achievements, and without them, I was nothing. An empty suit, a fraud who'd gotten lucky once and then revealed his true incompetence when it really mattered. Dr. Richardson kept insisting that wasn't true, that I had value beyond what I'd built, but I couldn't see it. I couldn't feel it, until I met Marcus. Marcus was a barista at the coffee shop 3 blocks from my apartment. I'd been going there every morning for months, one of those routines Dr. Richardson insisted I maintain, and I'd barely noticed him. I barely noticed anything in those days. I'd order my coffee, mumble thanks, and shuffle to a corner table where I'd stare at my laptop pretending to work on something, anything, just to feel like I still had a purpose. But one Tuesday morning, everything changed. I was having a particularly bad day. It was the anniversary of the breach. Exactly 1 year since everything fell apart. I'd woken up with this crushing weight on my chest, these memories flooding back of that moment when Jennifer told me we'd been hacked, when I realized what I'd done. I could barely get dressed, could barely walk to the coffee shop. When Marcus handed me my usual order, my hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. "Hey man, you okay?" he asked. And something about the genuine concern in his voice just broke me. Right there in the middle of a crowded Brooklyn coffee shop at 8:30 in the morning, I started crying. Not quiet tears, full-on sobbing. I couldn't stop. All the grief, all the shame, all the loss I'd been holding in for a year just poured out of me. Marcus didn't freak out, didn't tell me to leave or make a scene. He just calmly asked his co-worker to cover for him, guided me to a table in the back, and sat down across from me. He didn't say anything, didn't try to fix it or make it better. He just sat. And there, while I fell apart, occasionally pushing napkins across the table when I needed them. When I finally calmed down enough to breathe normally, he asked the simplest question: "You want to talk about it?" And for some reason, maybe because he was a stranger, maybe because I'd hit rock bottom and had nothing left to lose, maybe because I was just desperate for human connection, I told him everything, the whole story. Building the company from nothing, the success, the ego, the mistake, the breach, losing everything. I expected him to judge me, to tell me I was an idiot, to confirm everything I already believed about myself. But what he said instead changed my entire perspective. "Man, that's rough," he said when I finished. "But you know what I hear in your story? I hear someone who cared so much about building something meaningful that when you lost it, you lost yourself too. That's not weakness, that's passion. You just forgot to balance it with wisdom." I stared at him. I destroyed everything. Hundreds of people lost their jobs because of my arrogance. "Yeah, you made a massive mistake," Marcus agreed. "But you're not the mistake. You're the guy who built something amazing from nothing. You're the guy who worked 16-hour days for years to make something meaningful, and you're the guy who's taking full responsibility for what went wrong instead of blaming everyone else. That counts for something. I'd been waiting a year for someone to tell me I wasn't a complete failure, and here was this barista I barely knew, offering me more grace than I'd given myself." We talked for 2 hours. Turned out Marcus had his own story. He'd been a rising chef, worked at some fancy restaurants in Manhattan, was on track to open his own place. Then his partner stole their savings and disappeared. Lost everything overnight. Spent 3 years working minimum wage jobs just to survive, battling his own demons, his own sense of failure. But he'd found his way back. Not to being a fancy chef, that dream was gone, but to something else, something simpler but maybe more authentic. "The question isn't whether you failed," Marcus told me. "Everyone who tries something meaningful fails eventually. The question is what you learn from it and what you build next. Not the same thing, something new, something informed by the wisdom you paid so dearly to acquire." That conversation became a weekly thing, then twice a week. Then Marcus became the first real friend I'd made in years. Not a networking connection, not someone who wanted something from me, just a friend. He introduced me to his circle, other people who'd failed at big dreams and were rebuilding their lives in different ways. A former lawyer who now taught yoga, an ex-Wall Street trader who ran a food truck, a published author whose second book flopped so hard she couldn't get another contract and now worked at a bookstore. These people understood something I'd forgotten during my decade of success. Failing doesn't make you a failure, it makes you human. They didn't treat me like the cautionary tale everyone else saw. They saw someone who'd tried something difficult, learned expensive lessons, and now had a choice about what to do next. And slowly, very slowly, I started to believe maybe they were right. Maybe I wasn't defined by my worst mistake. Maybe there was still something I could contribute to the world. Around month 14 after the collapse, something shifted. I was having coffee with Marcus when he mentioned his sister was struggling with her small business. She ran a local bakery, barely making ends meet, drowning in the operational details and not sure how to grow. She needs help but can't afford a consultant, Marcus said casually, not even asking for anything, just venting about his family. But something clicked in my brain. I could help her, I said. And for the first time in over a year, I felt a spark of something that might have been excitement. Not the manic, ego-driven excitement of my past. Something quieter, but more genuine. I met with Marcus's sister Elena the next week. Spent 3 hours just listening to her story, understanding her challenges, looking at her numbers. And then I laid out a simple plan. Nothing fancy, no aggressive growth targets or corner cutting. Just smart, sustainable steps to improve her operations and gradually expand. "How much do you charge?" she asked when I finished. "Nothing," I said. "I'm not doing this for money. I'm doing it because I need to remember why I started building businesses in the first place." Elena was skeptical. Who wouldn't be? But she let me help, and over the next 3 months we implemented the changes. Small stuff mostly. Better inventory management. A social media strategy that didn't require a budget. Partnerships with local coffee shops. Her revenue increased by 35%. She hired 2 more employees. Nothing world-changing, but meaningful, real. She was so grateful, she introduced me to 3 other small business owners who needed help. I started consulting for free, working with small businesses that couldn't afford traditional consultants. A family restaurant struggling after COVID, a boutique clothing store competing with online retailers, an immigrant-owned cleaning service trying to expand. I'd spend hours with each of them, applying everything I'd learned, not just the technical knowledge, but the humility I'd acquired through failure. I listened more than I talked. I asked questions instead of assuming I had all the answers. I built in safety margins instead of pushing for maximum speed. Word spread quietly through Brooklyn's small business community. "There's this guy who used to run a big tech company, and now he helps regular people for free." More owners reached out. Then owners from other boroughs. Within 6 months, I was working with 42 small businesses, and something miraculous was happening. I was happier than I'd been in years, maybe ever. I wasn't making millions. I was barely making anything. I'd taken a part-time job teaching business classes at a community college just to pay rent. My apartment was small, my car was gone, my social media following had dwindled to almost nothing. By every metric I'd used to measure success for the previous decade, I was failing. But I'd wake up energized. I'd go to bed satisfied. I was helping people, really helping them, without any ego or agenda beyond making their lives a little better. Dr. Richardson noticed the change immediately. "You're different," she said in one of our sessions, "lighter somehow." I told her about the small businesses, about Marcus and Elena and all the others. About how I'd discovered that success wasn't about building the biggest company or making the most money or getting your face on magazine covers. It was about making a meaningful difference in ways that aligned with who you actually were, not who you thought you should be. "So, what's next?" she asked. And for the first time since the collapse, I had an answer that excited me. A real answer. Not a revenge fantasy about proving everyone wrong or rebuilding my empire. Something completely different. Something that would use everything I'd learned from both my success and my failure to create something genuinely valuable. 2 years after losing everything, I launched something new. But it wasn't another tech company trying to disrupt an industry or chase a billion-dollar valuation. It was something I never would have built during my first act, when I was obsessed with scale and growth and proving myself. I called it Foundation First, a non-profit organization dedicated to helping entrepreneurs build sustainable businesses with strong fundamentals instead of chasing hypergrowth at any cost. The concept was simple, but born from painful experience. I'd work with early-stage founders and teach them everything I'd learned the hard way. Not just the sexy stuff about raising money and scaling fast, but the boring, essential stuff about building proper systems, listening to your team, implementing real security, creating sustainable growth, and maintaining your humanity while building something meaningful. The things I'd ignored in my rush to the top. I funded it with what little money I had left and donations from the small businesses I'd helped. They'd all offered to pay me once they could afford it, and I'd finally accepted, but only enough to cover basic expenses. Marcus helped me set it up. Elena let me use her bakery's back room for workshops. Other people from my newfound community pitched in with their skills: website design, legal advice, accounting help. It felt like building something real for the first time, not just building something big. The first workshop I ran had 7 attendees, 7 founders who saw my story not as a cautionary tale, but as a learning opportunity. I told them everything: the mistakes I'd made, the warning signs I'd ignored, the human cost of my arrogance, the technical failures that stemmed from rushing. I didn't sugarcoat anything or try to save face. What was the point? My failure was public knowledge. I might as well make it useful. One of those founders was a 26-year-old woman named Priya, who was building an AI platform for healthcare providers. Smart, driven, brilliant technical mind. She reminded me of myself at that age, except when I suggested she slow down her launch timeline to implement proper security protocols, she actually listened. "I've seen what happens when you cut corners," she said. "I'm not making that mistake." 6 months later, her company landed its first major hospital contract, specifically because of their robust security infrastructure. That's when I realized the real value of my failure. It wasn't just a painful lesson for me. It could be a preventive lesson for others. Every founder who learned from my mistakes was a company that wouldn't collapse the way mine did. Every entrepreneur who prioritized sustainability over speed was a future success story that wouldn't end in catastrophe. My failure could become their foundation. Foundation First grew slowly but steadily. We never chased funding or tried to scale quickly. Ironic, right? Within a year, we'd worked with 124 founders. Within 2 years, over 400. Some of them built successful companies. Some of them failed, but they failed intelligently, learning and adapting instead of crashing and burning. And several of them came back to pay it forward, becoming mentors themselves, sharing their own hard-won wisdom with the next generation. Jennifer reached out during year 2. I almost didn't answer when I saw her name on my phone. The guilt was still there. The shame of having ignored her warnings, but she wasn't calling to say, "I told you so." She was calling because she'd heard about Foundation First and wanted to help. "You're teaching people the lessons you learned," she said. "That takes courage. I'd like to contribute." She became our lead technical advisor, teaching founders about security and infrastructure with the same patience I'd once ignored. We rebuilt our friendship slowly, carefully. She told me how angry she'd been, how betrayed she'd felt when I dismissed her concerns. I apologized, really apologized, not with excuses, but with genuine remorse. I was so afraid of being ordinary that I became reckless, I told her. "I'm sorry I didn't trust your expertise. I'm sorry I let my ego matter more than your experience." She accepted the apology, though she admitted it took her months to forgive me. Trust, once broken, doesn't heal quickly. But it can heal. The media eventually noticed what I was doing. Not the tech media. That had celebrated my rise and documented my fall. They weren't interested in a humble non-profit helping small founders, but other outlets, local newspapers, podcasts about entrepreneurship and failure. One interview with a business ethics professor went viral because I was brutally honest about my mistakes and their consequences. I destroyed $340 million in value and hundreds of careers because I thought I was too smart to fail, I said. If my story can prevent even one other founder from making the same mistakes, then maybe some good came from all that destruction. That interview led to speaking invitations. Not the glamorous conference keynotes I'd done before, but university classes, startup accelerators, founder support groups, places where people were actually trying to learn, not just looking for inspiration porn. I'd tell my story, answer questions, and always end with the same message. Success without wisdom is just luck waiting to run out. Build your wisdom first. Build it through humility, through listening, through accepting that you don't have all the answers. Everything else can follow. My parents finally visited Foundation First about 2.5 years after the collapse. My dad walked around the small office, just 3 rooms in a shared workspace, looking at the walls covered with photos of the founders we'd helped. "You seem different," he said finally. "Happier." He was right. I was different. The desperate need to prove myself was gone. The fear of being ordinary had evaporated. I'd discovered that there was something better than being exceptional, being genuine, being useful without needing to be the hero. I ran into my ex-girlfriend at a coffee shop, not Marcus's place, but close enough. She was with someone new, looking uncomfortable when she recognized me. "How are you?" she asked. The kind of polite question people ask when they don't really want to know. "I'm good," I said, and meant it. Really good, actually. She looked skeptical, probably assuming I was putting on a brave face, but it was true. I had less money, less status, less everything by conventional measures. But I had more peace, more purpose, more genuine human connection than I'd ever had during my years of success. 3 years after the collapse, Priya, that first founder I'd mentored, sold her company for $180 million. She called me immediately, before calling her parents or celebrating with her. "Team, this is partially yours," she said. "You taught me how to build something sustainable. You taught me that listening to my team mattered more than moving fast. You probably saved my company before I even fully built it." She insisted on donating a significant amount to Foundation First. I tried to refuse, but she reminded me that receiving help graciously was also a skill worth learning. With that funding, we expanded, hired staff, opened programs for founders from underrepresented communities who rarely got access to mentorship from experienced entrepreneurs, created resources for business owners dealing with failure and rebuilding, built a community where making mistakes wasn't shameful but educational, where asking for help was seen as strength, not weakness, where success was measured not by valuation or revenue, but by impact and sustainability. I still think about Martinez Technologies sometimes, about what it could have been if I'd been wiser, more patient, more humble, but I don't torture myself with those thoughts anymore. That company died because I wasn't ready to lead it properly. I needed to fail spectacularly to learn the lessons that now help others succeed. Was it the most expensive education in history? Probably, but it's the one I needed. Last month, I spoke at a startup accelerator in San Francisco, the same city where I'd once had an office, where I'd once been celebrated as a wunderkind. This time, I wasn't on the main stage. I was in a small breakout session with 15 founders sitting in a circle, sharing stories. One of them asked, "Do you regret it? Building your first company?" I thought about it carefully before answering. I regret the pain I caused. I regret the jobs that were lost. I regret not listening to the people who tried to help me. But the experience itself? No, because that failure taught me something success never could. That your worth as a human being has nothing to do with your achievements. You matter because you're here, because you can contribute, because you can learn and grow and help others. Everything else is just noise. Another founder asked, "What's your definition of success now?" That was easy. Waking up and knowing that what I'm doing matters to someone other than me. Going to bed satisfied that I listened more than I talked, learned more than I taught, gave more than I took. Building something that makes other people's lives genuinely better without needing my name on it or credit for it. That's success. Everything else is just ego. Today, Foundation First serves over 800 entrepreneurs across 12 states. We've helped prevent dozens of security breaches by teaching founders to prioritize proper infrastructure. We've helped hundreds of business owners avoid the trap of hypergrowth that nearly destroyed me. We've built a community where failure is seen as tuition paid for wisdom gained, not as a permanent stain on your identity. And me, I'm still in that one-bedroom apartment in Queens, still teaching part-time at the community college, still having coffee with Marcus every Tuesday, still working with small businesses who need help but can't afford traditional consultants, still learning every single day how to be better than I was. Not more successful by conventional standards, just better, more human, more helpful, more humble. If you made it to the end of this story, you're special. Subscribe to this channel, like this video, turn on notifications, and share this with 3 people who need to understand that failure isn't the end. It's often just the beginning of something more meaningful. Because here's the truth I learned the hard way. One rookie mistake can wipe out a decade of work, but that same mistake, if you're willing to learn from it, can become the foundation for something far more valuable than anything you lost. I built a $340 million company and lost it all in months. But I found something worth more than any valuation, the wisdom to know what actually matters, the humility to keep learning, and the purpose that comes from helping others avoid the mistakes that nearly destroyed me. That's not a consolation prize. That's the real success I was chasing all along. I just had to lose everything to find it.